we'll be talking about today with managing submissions. We'll go over viewing the submission data, so what that looks like within the submissions tab, how to manage statuses. This is both on the administrative side and the public user side. We'll talk about actual submission management of that data, so adding comments, editing data, doing things like manual overrides and deleting submissions. We'll talk about reporting as well, so bulk exporting and looking at all of the history that's occurred with each submission. We'll talk about user access, what it takes to actually provide access at an administrative level to view submission data and perform reviewer tasks. And then we'll touch just very briefly at the end of this as well on various API functionalities that you can also use to potentially integrate this with third-party systems to pull that data in. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into all of those features that I just discussed. So let me go ahead and switch my screens over and get logged in here. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and get logged into our demo instance. Perfect. Okay. So the first thing that I want to go ahead and show is I'm going to jump into the admin dashboard. And for those who are unfamiliar, when you have an AccessGov site or an Engagement Builder site set up, you'll just log in at the top right of the screen and click on Admin Dashboard. The first thing that I want to discuss today is user management around reviewing submission data and how that works to assign that access out. That would be done by any user managers who have access to that user management tab. This is where all of those users who have some sort of administrative access get invited and get set up for user access. By clicking New User at the top right, this is where you can invite any of those administrative users here using their email address. You can additionally provide a first and last name and a message that would be sent within that email as well. And then below is where you would actually assign the privileges based on the tenants and or sites that you're trying to provide access to. So if I go here on the right side, I can provide this user that I'm inviting any one of these user permissions. Most of these are regarding, well, I should say the bottom half right here is mostly regarding just viewing engagements. So that's going to be able to view engagements as a public user, able to test those in a visitor public user ability within the Engagement Builder test mode. And then there's also a reviewer permission here for test mode. So this is the first one that we'll be talking about today with reviewer. So if you are leveraging Engagement Builder's test mode as you're managing engagements and making changes to them, you'll be able to leverage that test mode to make sure everything works as expected. In order for those tasks to work in test mode, you would need that user to have tester reviewer assigned to them. Otherwise, they would not be able to view those test tasks. Additionally, up here, the next three that we have task assignee. If you are individually assigning a task to someone, and we'll talk about this especially in future sessions, or if anybody has further questions about this in the Q&A, I'm more than happy to answer this. But this is mostly with reviewer tasks where somebody may have an approval step within a workflow. If you assign that to one individual in particular, rather than using group functionality or any of the other assignment types, you would need to make sure that that individual has the task assignee type as a reviewer to be able to access the admin dashboard and have the typical reviewer experience, where on the right side you have a panel where all of the previous submission data has been provided. And on the left side, you can actually act on that task. Otherwise, task assignees can only be done at the visitor level, and they won't be able to review anything previously. Additionally, here we have two other reviewer permission types. We have a reviewer, which can review all submission data. Keep in mind that reviewer is assigned primarily at the tenant level. So when you provide somebody with a reviewer privilege, they can view all submission data that has been made to any forms and engagements under that entire tenant. That's why we always want to make sure to be very specific when we set you guys up with access to Engagement Builder, or set up your instance rather, that we are segregating out your forms into tenants that make sense for the team that's managing those. Because any team members who have access to any one of those tenants can view, manage, and manage the submission data of any form within that tenant. Additionally, there is a reviewer manager role here as well. Not only does this include the privileges for reviewer reviewing all submission data, but it also allows viewing all tasks, even if it's not assigned to them. And additionally, it includes some override functionality. So it includes bypassing workflows via manual overrides and deleting submissions if needed. Perfect. Moving on to the next spot here. So the next thing that I want to talk about is in the submissions tab, and this is where we'll be spending most of the time today, looking at stuff. But earlier today, I went ahead and made a submission to my demo form. So within the submissions tab, I'm going to go ahead and select demo form, filter by the initially submitted dates. If you had a more complex workflow where you have approval steps, this is always going to be the first initial submission. That differs from last updated, where you may have things like comments that are being done, approval steps, or other activities that may occur as a part of that workflow. That is why there's an additional date filter option here, just in case you wanted to see when something was last worked on by an internal member of your team or an activity last occurred on it. And then down here below, we can additionally filter by statuses as well. If you have a workflow with more statuses, you could filter by those as well. Those could be any of the reviewer tasks, any wait activities would additionally show there as well. Anything that it's going to sit on or be on for a long period of time would be a status represented on this left filter panel. I'll go ahead and press search right here. And we'll see a couple of submissions open up on the right side of the screen. I can see the last updated and initially submitted dates for any of these. I can also see the user that submitted this. That is assuming that they logged in with an AccessGov user account and made the submission using that account. If you ever see that the user is empty here, that means that they did not log in with an account. They were treated as an anonymous user and went ahead and made that submission. We will also see the label of the form that they completed and the status that the submission is currently in. On the right side here, we have a couple of download options for each of these. We can download the built-in PDF, which is that generated PDF that's made as a part of every submission. I'll show you that here in just a second when we actually dive into opening up the submission. And then we can also download any attached files, or we could download all of the above. If I open up any one of these submissions using the little box with an arrow icon on the right side of the row, I can open that up. And this is where I'll be able to view all of the submission data that has been received. On the right panel here, it's a very similar experience to what the public user actually interacts with during the submission process, where I can go through each page or section within the form and view each piece of data that was submitted by that user. One thing that you'll notice on the right side of the screen is that I have a couple of options for each field or each piece of data that's within that form. I have a pencil icon that allows me to edit any pieces of that data that were submitted, and I can modify it. So if instead of John listed here, I wanted to put Jack, I could switch that to Jack Doe. On the top right, I can save that revision, and I will see a history start to be represented here of any field changes that were made to the submission data. The one thing that is very important about editing submission data is that users with more complex workflows, where activities may depend on the submission data that's been received, if a change has been made to the submission data, but an activity has already occurred, let's say something like an email notification that may pull that first name into it, it's not suddenly going to resend out that email notification. So it's always important to really understand your workflows to understand if it makes sense to edit the submission data directly within what's been provided. That also can include things like data source updates, where if you have a data table that information from submissions is being entered into automatically after a submission has been received, it's not going to automatically go in and update that submission data. That is something that would have to be done manually, or we could potentially manually override, although there's a lot of caution with that I'll discuss here in just a minute when we talk about manual overrides. So you do have the ability to edit submission data. It is very good and easy for more simple forms that are, don't have these additional activities attached to them. But just keep in mind, just based off how you set up your workflow, this may or may not make sense to be able to edit based on how your workflow has been set up. I can also make any comments related to these fields as well. So if I wanted to provide more context as to why I changed this from John to Jack, I could say user called our customer support and let us know that the legal name was not correct. And then there, I can provide access to the reviewers only, meaning only people with administrative access with one of the user roles that we talked about before can see this comment. Or I could potentially open this up to everyone as well, so that when a user views their prior submission, that they would be able to see any comments that have been made on this. By default, it's going to just select reviewers only, and I can go ahead and add that in. On the left side of the screen, we have another comments section. This is more about the submission as a whole. So if you wanted to, provide context as to maybe other things you're doing outside of Engagement Builder that may relate to this submission or anything at all regarding the submission, you can make comments for the submission as a whole. By default, these will flip to reviewers only rather than the field ones, but just make sure that that's selected there. We have some other tabs here as well on the top left of the screen. That includes the Files tab. These are any files that have been provided by the user or generated as a part of the submission flow for this particular submission. So this includes any form attachments that were provided. And if I scroll within the form, you'll see that there was a document upload section that I went ahead and uploaded a PDF. Now I could click on this, download it to my computer to be able to review the attachment that was provided. I can also view the default PDF, as we refer to it as, which is just a PDF that includes all of the submission data that was sent by the user. This is just a PDF format of it. So I can see the form name that was submitted here at the top left. I can see the date and time that it was submitted over, and then I can see all of the various sections and fields that were completed as well. There's a number of places within Engagement Builder that these are available, not only here to you as an administrative user when you're reviewing the submission, but this could also be included as a part of automated email notifications that go back to the user. And additionally, this is presented to the user within the submission confirmation. As soon as they press submit and submit that over, they will actually have a download submission button that they can download this PDF onto their computer as well to retain it for their records. Moving into the next part here, we also have a history tab. So within the history tab, we can see every single action or activity that has occurred as a part of the submissions flow. So I can see things such as status changes and when exactly those happened. I can see that it was changed from an unsubmitted item to a submitted item, which means that they had created a draft, of course, and then submitted that over, and now it's been received on our side. And then I can also see any field changes that I may have made within the form. And I can also see things like email notifications that have gone out. This, I also have the option to go ahead and resend that email notification to the email addresses that were provided or set up within that activity. So that if they are saying that they didn't receive that message, I could go ahead and send that back up to the top of their inbox. Anything else? This would also within the history tab show if you guys have payment linked to any of your forms. You would also see when payment was collected, how much it was collected for, and then the order ID from our transaction processing engine that's associated with that as well. Perfect. A couple of options that we also have here on the left panel include return submission. This is one that is a little more tricky, kind of the same as editing submission data. It really depends on your workflow to understand if this is useful for you or not. But what a return submission does is after you've received a submission, you could identify that there are numerous fields that were filled in incorrectly, or they didn't provide the correct attachments, or something is wrong with the form that needs to be corrected by the original form submitter. What you can do is go ahead and return that submission back to them so that they receive an email to the email address they provided. It has been configured with the return submission functionality that includes a comment about what needs to be corrected and a link to go ahead and open up and already have all of the information that they provided before pre-filled. The benefit being that they don't have to completely refill out that form again. They can just open up what they already submitted before, make changes based off the comments that you provided, and then go ahead and resubmit that back to you. All that takes from you and as administrator is clicking return submission, providing a comment here, and pressing return. The real big caveat with returning submissions is that as soon as the user resubmits that, it's treated as a brand new submission. That means all activities that may have occurred before will occur again. That includes data source updates, that includes email notifications, especially if payment was required as a part of the original submission. Payment will now be required again from the user, and you would have to go through the additional administrative process on your side to handle that refund through the transaction processing engine. So like I said, it's very dependent on your workflow of whether or not this functionality really makes sense for you, but it is very beneficial for your more simple forms where you really just need to return those back and get the correct information from the user. Another option here within the review panel as well is within this dropdown, there is a change status option. This actually previously used to be called manual override, and they've changed that for a little more clarity with change status. What this lets you do is let something jump around in the workflow. So if you have a more complex workflow, and this one is way more simple, so that's why we're seeing a lot less statuses presented on my screen. But you could return that back to various reviewer forms or earlier steps in the process if this is a specialty case where this submission, didn't correctly have something handled with it, we could have it jump within that workflow. This is something to be very, very cautious of because as you start to make submissions jump around in your workflow, certain dependencies in your workflow on I expect this data to be available to me at this point in the workflow may not function correctly. Because if you've skipped over a reviewer form, if you've skipped back to a certain step of the process, that data that it's expecting may not actually be present at that point in time. So this is really only used for very, very specific use cases where you have a submission that you're having trouble continuing through the workflow. Maybe an error has occurred with it or something was messed up during the review stage. This is how we would do that, is by using the status change to make it jump over the workflow. We also have an option, you may have seen back here as well, under this dropdown for deleting the submission as well. This allows us to move it into the deleted category. One thing that I actually do need to get a little more clarity on from our product team, and I know actually this is something that you brought up before, Scott, is what happens when a submission is actually deleted. That is something that if you guys have kind of a more strict policy on needing submissions to be fully deleted because of PII, definitely reach out to us because we'll want to make sure to set up any policies on your instance that we need to make sure that submissions are fully deleted when needed. But this would allow you to go ahead and move those into a deleted status, and then those would pile into the deleted status here at the very bottom left of the screen. Perfect. Let me go ahead and make sure what I wanted to go over next. The next thing that I wanted to go over was filters and columns within the Engagement Builder interface as well. So you may notice that on this screen, when I pull up a list of results on the right side, I only have these system fields available to me as columns for each one of these submissions. But what if I wanted to pull in more data from our form so that I can recognize more at a glance what each submission is? And additionally, on the left side of my screen, what if I want to easily be able to enter the user's address as an example and see which submissions are related to that email address from that user? To do that, I would have to edit the engagement. So I would go to the Sites tab, locate the engagement that I want to add those additional filters or columns for. So an example might be my demo form that I submitted to here. I will click on the pencil icon on the right side of my screen. It will always take me to the Setup tab, unless I've already been working on it, but that's pretty much always the first tab it will take you to. And then on the left side of my screen, you will see another Submissions tab. This is not to be confused with the Submissions tab that we were just in. When you are editing an engagement and going to that Submissions tab, it is instead a Submission Settings tab. This lets you customize the Submissions tab that we were previously in to add additional filters and columns. If I scroll down here, I will have a green Add button down below. This will allow me to add something like an email address from the user. Select the element that I want to reference, and then go ahead and add that as either a search filter, meaning that it would be a text box on the left panel within the Submissions tab that I can enter that search criteria in, press search, and get a list of relevant results, or a result column. And that would be just adding a column within the table on the right side so that I can easily see at a glance what submission data is related to which submission. I can additionally add it to both, so I can make it both a search filter and a result column. So I'll go ahead and do that for this one. If I save that change, and I'm actually going to go ahead and publish that on this form. If you were to just save it right now, it would only apply to test submissions. You would want to make sure to fully publish that change to make sure that it would apply to those production submissions as well. If I go back to the Submissions tab right here, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a refresh, we will see that on the left side of the screen, I can go ahead and search for those. So I could search for brian.cox@tylertech.com and pull any relevant results with that data included in it. And then additionally, on the right side, I can now see email address populated. So I can easily see, okay, who submitted this one, who submitted that one. Rather than having to open up each submission individually, I can now begin to just look at one, one by one, or look at all of them at a glance on this screen to see which is which. With this functionality, I will say sometimes the data that you're pulling in will only work for submissions moving forward after you have customized that submissions settings, customize the filters and result columns for each engagement. It really depends on the field that you're pulling in. There's kind of a back-end process of updating this information within the Submissions tab that just depending on the field, you'll have to kind of trial and error to see whether or not it'll only work for submissions moving forward or whether, like it did in this case, it'll also work for previous submissions as well. So it just depends case by case, but yeah, that is the filters and results columns. The next thing that I want to quickly show you is status management. So this is going to be more for things like workflows, but we also have some capability to do it in things like submittable forms. But if I were to open up an example workflow here, let me open up the request record. If within this workflow, I wanted to customize any point of this to make it very clear to the user of what is happening at that point in time, I can edit any of the statuses related to these form activities or any other activities that something might be sitting on. That would also include things like wait activities, where it's going to wait for a duration of time. We want to clearly make a status present to the end user for that. To do that, for each form that I have in my workflow, I can go ahead and left click on it, just like I did there. And I will have a visitor status and a reviewer status option. So for visitor status option for the first form in a workflow, I might say like creating draft as an example. And for the reviewer status, I might be like, same thing, creating draft. I can't make them the same if I want. It's just dependent on what might make sense more for the reviewer to see versus the visitors to see. Then within the reviewer form, I could do something like record request under review for the visitor status, or for the reviewer status, it might make more sense to say the record request needs to be reviewed, because that is an action item that needs to occur on our side and completed. If I wanted to be more vague about it, for the visitor, I could just say something like under review. I could say awaiting determination. I could say, in progress. I can make this as specific or as general as I want on what's actually presented to that user. Like I said, we would be able to do that for each activity that actually occurs within this workflow. Each activity that something is going to sit on. And so I'm going to go ahead and save that change. Let me publish that. And so now when a user goes to submit to this form, they'll start to complete it. So I am John Doe, Brian Cox at tylertech.com. Their phone number here. So they're going to start to fill out that information. Let's say they press save and exit because they save that as a draft. Now, in the to-do column, the status that is presented to them is creating draft. If they were to go ahead and continue with that, I will just put in that and submit that over. This is the confirm submission dialog that's presented to that user. If I submit, just kind of circling back a little bit, this is also where the public user will be able to download that submission PDF as well. So if they want to retain that for their own records, they can download that. And then we'll see that goes away from the to-do column for that public user, goes into in progress, and now I customize that status to say in progress. So that is what is going to be presented to the user. And then accordingly with the done status, it's going to present that status as well, which I should have touched on. End statuses can also be edited within your workflows. So if I go back to my request record here, go into the workflow, and then scroll down to the bottom, this end status that the submission will end up in, if I left click on it, this is where I can also edit a visitor status and a reviewer status, depending on how I want to present that. I can also have multiple end events within my workflow. So if I wanted rejected to actually show that it's been rejected, I could have that go to a separate end activity with the status showing such. That may also help you when you're viewing submissions within the submissions tab and you're trying to filter them. Maybe you only want to see the rejected submissions. You would be able to create that specific end status and then filter those accordingly within this filter panel. Let's take a look at the next topic that we wanted to go into, display labels. So display labels are, if you go back to what is presented to the user here. So let's say the user, let me start filling out that request record again. So I'm John Doe, save and exit. So if the user is currently working on a draft right here, by default, it will show the form that they are completing. But let's say we have a particular form that maybe there's an entity that's filling out the form on behalf of multiple people. Maybe we want to customize to kind of give more context as to what this form submission is about. We can do that by navigating to under the setup tab right here, there will be this display label. We can fully input a calculation right here to start to put together what exactly is presented to the user. So the most likely way that I would do this is something like a text concatenation, where I am concatenating a static string of text, where maybe I do record request, and then I'm pulling in some sort of data from the form, maybe their first name, maybe a phone number, maybe a particular identifier that we have within that form, that then is presented to the user. If I go ahead and save that change, publish it, then as that public user, let me go back to that page. I may have to refresh this. Yeah. Perfect. Save and exit. We will now see that in the user's My Forms section, that it will now show a record request for John. So this is very beneficial for those entities that may be submitting on behalf of multiple people. We've definitely had that use case before from various state agencies. This is a way to set that up. And then the last topic that I want to quickly touch on today as well is API integrations. So we do have the ability to take submission data that's been made to any one of your forms and pull it into an external service. Now, this would require an external service, a middleware API to go and fetch that data. Effectively, how it works is that at a certain point in the submission flow, you would make it so that that submission data is pushed to a particular endpoint on the engagement builder side, and it is ready for an external service to go ahead and grab, pick up from the queue, and then mark it as fetched. So if I were to go into an example workflow here, the way that I would do that is within my workflow tab, I have this add-in here. And technically, you can do this within submittable forms. I do typically recommend doing these in workflows, as you have a lot more customizability as to when the information is available at the endpoint, but you can technically do it within submittable forms as well. So if I, after it has been approved, wanted to make this available at the submissions API endpoint, as we refer to it as, I would add in this API integration activity, and then I would customize it accordingly. So I can add a notification URL. That would be a notification URL on the integrating application side, so more on your side. That would be notified once a submission has come in. I would add an API mark. This is essentially just a unique identifier for the queue that you need to leverage whenever you go fetch it. And then you can set up basic authentication as well. All of the information regarding how to use this API integration is available on our EB training site. If you were to navigate to the eb-training.colorado.gov, we got a little bit of an echo there. Good. If you were to navigate to eb-training.colorado.gov, navigate to the user manual option up here within the navigation. There is an API integration section that you can go ahead and open that will outline all of the various types of APIs that are available to you. The one that I just mentioned, which is within your workflow, making your submission data available at a particular endpoint, that would be this submissions API endpoint option here towards the bottom. And this outlines all of the various endpoints, how to set it up, what variables and parameters you would need to pass, and everything it takes to get that set up. The one thing that I especially want to mention is that it really does work like a queue process. So when that submission data becomes available at the endpoint, it essentially adds it to a queue. You would want to get all of the unprocessed submissions, grab those. It's essentially going to be a list with all of the objects within them with the submission data. And then you would have to mark each submission or each form processed within that queue. That way you're marking it off so that next time you go and fetch it, it doesn't have the previous submission data available as well. So all to say, we do have the ability to integrate this with external services. It can require a little bit of a setup, whether on that services side or a middleware side that you kind of put in between, but you are able to take that submission data and populate it into those external services. Perfect. That is everything that I wanted to go over for today's feature deep dive. Now let me go ahead and switch it back over to the slide so I can go through a couple of items, and then we'll of course go ahead and open it for Q&A. Actually, it looks like we can just go ahead and open it for Q&A now. I thought we had a couple more slides in there. Is there our inside here? So if you guys want the engagement builder site, there's a quick little QR code for it. Our next session will just be the open Q&A on June 16th at 10 a.m. as always. If you guys have any questions outside of these sessions, you're always more than welcome to open a ticket. And that can easily be found on the Engagement Builder training site via the Contact Us link. And then if you guys are ever looking to set up new instances, get help with setting up payment, any enhancements to your existing implementations, that's also where we would look at having you guys open a new project, which is available via the platform overview section on the training site. So, thank you everyone today for attending, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next session.
Thank you all.
Thanks everyone.